Hi, and welcome back for another Christmas movie review. So, I'm going to review Die Hard, which is definitely a Christmas movie because it takes place on Christmas Eve. And I'm surprised that there's even debate about that because I don't think there's any other way to interpret a movie that takes place on Christmas Eve. But anyway, it's also like one of the best action movies of all time and is the jumpstart to, the Die Hard series. And I feel like I was introduced to it with Die Hard with a Vengeance when I was a kid. It came out in 1995. And then later I went back and I saw Die Hard and Die Hard 2. But yeah, if it's not like anybody wouldn't know the plot, but we know the plot. Bruce Willis goes to see his wife in LA. She has a job out there. While she's there, terrorists take over and he has to save the day with no shoes. That's a very, very brief description, but anyway. So yeah, just a couple of things I like about the movie. We're not getting too deep, just here we go. One, I really love the soundtrack of Die Hard. And until I watched it again recently, I hadn't really thought about that, but it just adds to like the tension of the movie. And I absolutely love it. And, every time I watch it, like I'm enjoying it, but I hadn't really thought about like, yeah, and we know this about soundtracks of movies. They definitely add to the enjoyment of it, but like this one, it's really good. And then again, like I mentioned in my review for Batman Returns, those Christmas work parties. Now this one I'm not sure I would have really wanted to be at because it's on Christmas Eve, and on Christmas Eve I'm going to be in my house, not at my job. But I mean, at least they were at a party. They weren't working. But again, where are these jobs where they hire a string quartet and y'all drinking champagne, having a Christmas party late? I don't know. But anyway, so they're at the Christmas Eve party. And I love that scene, just like that whole setup and the concept of having like a fancy work party. And also, the driver is hilarious to me because, he's such a good-hearted person, young guy. But I also like the scene where, Bruce Willis as John McClane is trying to get the police officer's attention, and you can see all this chaos going on in the background, and Argyle's just in the limo listening to music, just like jamming out. You don't even see the stuff going on in the background. That scene always makes me laugh. But yeah. Also, as a movie that came out in 1988, it does have some like random current event commentary that it's like, and some past event commentary, but it's just like, it's interesting how movies drop certain things like that into movies and make them like plot points. Like, I don't know. Like I said, it's very much a movie of its time. Very 80s movie. But yeah, so really one of the central plots of the movie is this kind of like breakdown / reconciliation of John McClane and his wife Holly and their marriage, because you're introduced in the movie, he's coming to LA to see her, you're seeing her and her job, you can obviously tell she's one of the higher ups at her job. And then he's explaining when he's in the car with Argyle that 6 months ago she got this really great job opportunity, she came out there, he stayed in New York, and it's clear that this was like a source of contention and like a problem for them. And what I think that's interesting about it is like it kind of was depicting what we would later see is that shift in gender dynamics in marriages where once we kind of got into like the 80s and more equality in the workplace, a lot of women started having more education, more degrees, higher paying jobs than their significant others, and becoming breadwinners of their households, and how that would change your gender dynamic, especially because his job in comparison, as a police officer, even though we respect people who are police officers, firemen, teachers, it's just a given that for jobs that give so much, they get very little in return, especially financially. So it's like the disparity is like even more stark now that she has this, great job. And it's obvious even without them showing us the fights or the conversations that they've had, that when they get back together, it's still raw for them, and kind of sets the tone for the rest of the movie, where it's like, they've had this little argument again when they see each other. And throughout the movie, you can kind of feel like both of them regret that they're not going to be able to say what they really want to say to each other, because they don't know if they're going to make it. And the other thing that I like, so I'm not going to talk too much about like the villain in this review, even though it's Alan Rickman and he's awesome. But obviously, they're assuming that because they come in there and they take them hostage, that they're like terrorists. But in fact, they're just robbers and they're there to steal money. But while all of this is happening and John McClane is trying to figure it out, he's desperately trying to get law enforcement and the outside world to know what's going on. And he finally gets the attention of, Al, who is, would you call him a beat cop? I don't know. But, anyway, and what is that actor's name? I can't think of that actor's name, but the dad from Family Matters, where he also plays a cop. But anyway, they form this really interesting dynamic throughout the film, where Al is like his contact to what's going on outside. And their dynamic is so great because I love how Al is the only one who is actively listening to John McClane like the entire movie. Because immediately when he's listening to John McClane explain what's going on, he immediately picks up context clues that this person on the other line is quite possibly another cop. And of course that turns out to be true. And I love how that dynamic allows them to kind of communicate without communicating like too much in detail. Like they just know, like, hey, this is about to happen. You know how this goes down. All of that type of stuff. And it just adds layers to it. And considering that this is like such a traumatizing, stressful experience that John McClane is going through, like it's really wonderful that you just had that one person that was like always like, hey, I got your back. I know exactly what's going on. I'm here, I'm listening. And especially the scene where they get really vulnerable with each other, where John McClane basically asks, like, why are you like, doing like a desk job, like, and then Al has to explain that, he shot a child by accident and his regret over it. He was a rookie cop, and just kind of showing his own emotion and regret over something he did as a police officer. And then after that, John McClane lets him know that he wants him to notify his wife if he doesn't make it, that he is sorry for not having her back when she got that job opportunity. And it's just such an interesting moment of vulnerability between the two of them, discussing like their regrets in life. And then obviously in the end, I just love that scene when John McClane is coming out with Holly and Al is there waiting, and like they immediately know each other and they go to each other and they hug, and it's just like this release. And then the scene where Al saves the day, because after that incident when he was a rookie cop, he hasn't used his weapon, but he ends up saving the day when that one that big terrorist, like, he isn't dead yet, and he saves the day. And it's just such an interesting thing, because it's like, had they not shared all these things with each other over the course of the night, he might not have ever regained the courage to do that. And it's just like an interesting kind of like closure to this relationship that they've developed over the course of the movie. And then lastly, well, not completely lastly, but one of the last things or points that I want to make is that one of the things I like about this movie, which I hadn't really thought about until I was older watching it, is A lot of times when we talk about representation in movies, people assume that people want a very specific type of representation. By that I mean, Black viewers, if we say we want representation, I think people think we mean to make it a Black story. And it's like, no, we get stories that are obviously told from our perspective. A very recent example is Sinners. That is a story by a Black filmmaker about the Black experience. But the thing I like about Die Hard is you have different Black characters that are just allowed to play those characters. And I feel like a lot of times when we say representation, we want all of it. We want the stories like Sinners. But you also want, like what you see in Die Hard, like Theo, the character that's like the computer hacker, is a serious cold-blooded villain in my opinion. And that actor, oh god, what is his name? And he's passed away now because death sucks. But anyway, I think it's Clarence Gilliard III is his name. If I'm wrong, I'll put it in the description box what his correct name is. But like, his character as the computer hacker is just, he plays it so well. And in actuality, after Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber, like his character as the computer hacker is like my favorite villain in the movie. And then you have Al Powell, you know, the good-natured cop who helps John McClane. And then you have Argyle, like the funny young limo driver, you know, who's a good person who told John in the beginning, hey man, if it doesn't work out, I'll get you a hotel room. And then in the end, he kind of saves the day because he stops Theo from escaping. And then he gives Holly and John a ride. And it's just like, when we say representation, I think that's what all we mean. Just let us play all the roles. Like everybody else gets a chance to play all the roles. And they were allowed to be all those things in that one movie. And I don't know, it's just something that I really enjoyed about Die Hard. Now, the actual last thing I want to talk about is this depiction of how predatory the media is. Because that news reporter that went there to report the story, that even after like they saw that big like explosion, his first thing to say was, tell me you got that, just to make sure that they captured it on camera, not the fact that people have been injured. It just totally captures the way media kept evolving from that time period to be sensational rather than have you actually feel emotions for what you're watching. And the invasiveness of it, like when they find out, you know, where Holly's house is, and they go to her house and they're interviewing her children without her permission, and he threatens the maid, which also is just a little bit too familiar for the times that we're in. But it just kind of reminds me about how now people get mad, like, because, you know, TMZ now, like whenever a celebrity or a famous person dies, like usually they're the first ones to break the story. And it's usually not in an appropriate or respectful way. And so it's just interesting because like that character of the news reporter is like the precursor to that, just the invasiveness of the media in situations where you should have more tact and decorum. But yeah, so that's like my little brief review of Die Hard. Like, you know, I could go deeper, and, you know, no, I didn't talk about Alan Rickman, but I feel like his performance in that movie speaks for itself. But yeah, those are just some things I just wanted to highlight about another one of my favorite Christmas movies. And I'm sure it's going to be on TV multiple times, which is a funny thing because I don't think until recent years did they start playing it at Christmas time, because yes, it's a Christmas movie. But next up, I'm going to actually be switching gears from Christmas to New Year's Eve. So thanks for watching.